Welcome to Computopedia, the channel where we learn about computer science. In this video, we're going to talk about function and trigger, which is a function and trigger in databases. This is part of the databases laboratory activity series with me, Zikri Radian Fudali. Now, let's get into it. Function. So what is a function? The first thing is that it's a different from procedures. So from previous videos, we already learned about procedures, and function is different from that. MySQL stored function. A stored function is a special kind of stored program that returns a single value. This is the first difference of the procedure. In function, it will always return a single value. You use stored function to encapsulate a common formulas or other business rules that are reusable among SQL statements or stored programs. We'll see after this how it plays. And different from stored procedure, you can use a stored function in SQL statement. So this is the second difference. In SQL statement, wherever an expression is used. So wherever, anywhere, when an expression is used, you can use this stored function. This helps improve the readability and maintainability of the procedural code. So if we use stored function, if you want to change the function itself, all of the query are not going to change. Now, this is the illustration of the simple syntax for creating a new stored function. First, we specify the name of the stored function after the create function clause. So the create function must be there, and then we create the function name. We must define the function name. Secondly, we list all of the parameters that of the stored function inside of this parenthesis. So we have parameter 1, parameter 2, and so on. By default, all parameters are in parameters. So this is also different from the procedures. In the procedures, you can have an in, out, or in-out modifiers on the parameters, but for function, by default, all of the parameters are in parameters. Third, you must specify the data type of the return value. So here's the return data type. You don't need to create any variables. You don't need to change the parameters. You just need to return, and then the return data type was set right here. It can be any valid MySQL data types. It can be ENT, and can be varchar, and so on. Fourth, for the same input parameter, if the stored function returns the same value, it is considered deterministic. Otherwise, the stored function is not deterministic. So, if you, in this function, if you have same input that are called at different time, and it will have the same result, and then it will be considered as deterministic. Otherwise, the stored function is not deterministic. For example, if the returns value like have a connection to another data in another table, and that data or table can be changed. For example, about time from now and then from then are different, then it will be a non-deterministic function. But if it's just like an addition of parameter 1 and parameter 2, and then that's a deterministic type, and we must create the statement over here. If you declare it incorrectly, the stored function may produce an unexpected result, or the available optimization is not used, which degrades the performance. So you must really think with whether this is a deterministic or a non-deterministic, and use the right statement. Fifth, lastly, you write the code in the body of the stored function. It can be in a single statement or a compound statement. So over here on the statements, inside this body section, you have to specify at least one return statement. If there is no if else, the return statement returns a value to the caller. So it will return to the call, just like any other functions in any other programming language. And whenever the return statement is reached, the stored function's execution is terminated immediately. So after we pass on to the return, and then the execution are terminated immediately. Now let's see the example. Let's take a look of an example of using store function. We will use this customer table on the sample database for the demonstration. So you can go over here, just type this on your browser and download the sample database. Now this is the store function example. Just like the before, we change the delimiter first, and then we create function. The customer level are the name of the function, and we have the parameters of P credit limit. P initiates as parameters. This is a good naming habit. And the data type of the parameters is double. It returns a variable character, a varchar, with the length of 10, with the size of 10. This is a deterministic function, and we'll see why. Here we have begin and end, which is the statement. We declare a level LVL, varchar 10. As we can see here, we want to return the level over here. So we return the level over here, and then we create the else if statement. If the P credit limit is more than 50,000, then we set the level as platinum. If it's between 50 to 10,000, it's gold, and it's below 10,000, it's silver. After that, then we return the LVL. We can use this variable, or we can just return the over here as well. So rather than we set a variable, then we can just return platinum, or return gold, or return silver over here. So that is the example of this store function. Now we can call the customer level in the select statement. So for example, here we have the customer name. We select customer name, and then we call the function. We call the customer level with the credit limit as the parameter. This is the credit limit that associate with this customer name. So in just one, from table customer ordered by customer name. We can see here the result. So the result, we have customer name, Alpha Cognac, the customer level that using the credit limit is platinum, silver, and so on. So here are the function usage. Now let's talk about trigger. An SQL trigger is a set of SQL statements stored in the database catalog. An SQL trigger is executed or fired, as the name trigger, just like a gun, fired whenever an event associated with a table occurs. For example, an insert, an update, or even a delete. An SQL trigger is a special type of stored procedure. So it is like the son or the daughter of the stored procedure. It is special because it is not called directly like a stored procedure. So the difference between a trigger and a stored procedure is that a trigger is called automatically when a data modification event is made against a table, whereas a stored procedure must be called explicitly. So this trigger, a stored procedure that's being called automatically, will be called as a trigger. So that's the difference. There are few advantages when we use a trigger. The first one is that it provides an alternative way to check the integrity of the data itself. The second one, it can catch error in the business logic in the database layer. So if there is some error, like an input error, we can just track that. We'll see. It also can provide an alternative way to run scheduled tasks. So after I insert and then I have to do something else, and then I can just create a trigger. The fourth advantage, you don't have to wait to run scheduled tasks because the trigger are invoked automatically before or after a change is made to the data in the tables. So like this is connected to the third advantage. And lastly, it's very useful to audit the change of data in tables. We will see the example of this advantage in this video later. Of course, when we have advantages, we also have some disadvantages. Trigger itself only provides an extended validation that they cannot however, they cannot replace all of the validation. Some simple validation need to be done in the application layer. So if we build an application, for example, if we want to invalidate the user's input, like the password must contain number, must contain character, a special character, then that's being done on the application side, not on the database side. So we can see here we can validate the user input in the client side by using JavaScript or on the server side by using the PHP, .NET, Perl, and so on. So that's on the application side, not on the database side. The trigger itself is invoked and executed invisibly from the client application. Therefore, it is difficult to figure out what happens in the database layer. Because of the automatic nature of the trigger, we cannot see what happens because it's automatic and then it's invisible by the application. And it may or may not increase the overhead of the database server. Because, for example, if we have a lot of trigger after insert and then we insert something, the process of insert are going to be stuck because of the trigger. So rather than just running one insert command, the insert command will bring another trigger, another command, which can be something like an overhead to the database server. If it's insert so many times, then well, we need to be careful for this one. Okay, so now let's talk about trigger implementation. In MySQL, a trigger is a set of SQL statements that is invoked automatically when a change is made to the data on the associate table, just like we see before. A trigger can be invoked either before or after the data is changed by insert, update, or delete statement. Before MySQL version 5.7.2, you can define a maximum of 6 triggers for each table. But after that, I think there will always be update to that, so please refer to the current version of the MySQL. It may be different as well for different databases, so please do refer on the manual for each SQL. Here we have 6, so we can use before or after on every statement. So insert, update, and delete. So before insert, after insert, and so on. So here are the 6 available functions. To use this trigger, you must use a unique name for each trigger associated with a table. So each trigger are associated on each table. However, you can have the same trigger name defined for different tables, even though there is not a good practice. So if we use a same trigger name for, like, we create table name, we cannot use that. So this is a difference. The naming, a good practice of the naming is that we choose a name of the trigger and then we add the table name itself. This is an example for that. You should name the triggers using the following naming convention. So we have before and then the table name and then insert, update, or delete. For example, we have before order, so we have the table name order and then update. It is a trigger before the order table is being updated. Another version of the following naming convention, just like this one, we have table name before, after, insert, update, or delete. So for example, this is the same, order before update. This is the same as the trigger above. So which one to use, that's up to you, but please do follow just one of these. This is you can use your own convention, your own naming, that's totally fine, but it's easier for us to use this convention for us to communicate with other developer. So if we use a convention, and that's will be better, will be easier for us to communicate between each other. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the MySQL trigger storage. So in MySQL stores triggers in data directory here in data classic models or the databases with the file names of table name.trg and the trigger name.trn. The trg files maps the trigger to the corresponding table, and the trigger name.trn files contain the trigger definition, so the statement inside of that. You can backup the MySQL trigger by copying the trigger files to the backup folder. You can also backup the triggers using the MySQL dump tool. This is an external tool order from the MySQL one, so you need to download that first. There is some limitation. MySQL triggers cover all features defined in the standard SQL. However, there are some limitations that you should know before using them in your application. MySQL trigger cannot show load data or load table or backup database in this statement. They use statement that commit or rollback implicitly, such as commit, rollback, and so on. This cannot be done. And it cannot use prepared statements as prepare and execute, and it cannot use the dynamic SQL statement. So if you want to do this, please don't use trigger. Use anything else than the trigger itself, because the triggers cannot do this. So let's go to the syntax. In order to create a new trigger, you use the create trigger statement. So this is not a create procedure, but create trigger. This is the illustration. So we have trigger name, trigger time, trigger event on table. So on table name for each row, begin, end. So this is the statement. Let's see here on the syntax above. So just this, if this is too small for you, you put the trigger name after the create trigger statement. The trigger name should follow the naming convention, just like as we discussed before. For example, before employees update. Trigger activation time can be before or after. So here can be before or after. Which one will you choose? And then the trigger event can be insert, update, or delete. So just as stated before, a trigger only can be invoked by one event, so we cannot use multiple trigger event if we want to use multiple, and then we can just create multiple trigger. To define a trigger that is invoked by multiple events, you have create multiple triggers. A trigger must be associated with a specific table. Without a table, trigger would not exist. So the on keyword is a must. You place the SQL statement between begin and end. So yeah, so that's the statement. Now let's go to the example really quick. We create a new table like this, and then we create the trigger before employee update, before update on employees for each row, for every row. We begin, insert it to the employees audit, and then we set action to the update. The employee number, it's the old employee number. So while we update the employees, we will store the old value to the employees audit. As we can see here, the change date is now. So this table are like functioning to record what's being changed. To show the trigger, we can show here, show triggers. We have the triggers name over here in event, in tables, what's the statement, what's the timing, when it's being created, and so on. After that, the employees tables, to check whether the trigger is invoked, we can see here, after we update this, and then it will result that on the employee's ID, we'll insert this one. So this is the set last name. The last name, we changed the last name to fun. And here are the output of the query of the employees audit. So I think nothing is changed, but yeah, it should be changed. Okay, that's the example of the trigger. I hope you barely understand about function and triggers. If you want to know more about this, you can search it online, or you can ask me by commenting below. And do please subscribe and like this video for the next videos as well. So I think that's that from me. See you on the next video.